We are drawing to a close in our study of Ecclesiastes. It may have seemed like it's gone slow to you, but it seemed like it's gone fast to me. So we are in the very end of chapter 11, jumping into chapter 12 of the book of Ecclesiastes. And remember the two paths that he's taken us on, the two grand lessons that he's trying to teach us. One is kind of an earthly lesson, and one is, we'll call it a heavenly lesson. The earthly lesson is that life is frustrating, life is not fair, and so the best way to enjoy it is to just accept those facts. Don't let them get you down, and just make the best of this existence. God has given you a certain portion in life, a certain heritage, lot in life, or the different translations say, and that is to enjoy life. God intends for you to enjoy life. And so some of the advice is, again, to not get mired down, bogged down in the inequities of life. Just realize that's the way it is. And the second lesson then is, on that earthly side, is again to enjoy life. You're working. Don't hoard that money up. Use it. Enjoy it. That's what you're working for. Now, we've added all the caveats and the asterisks in there. That doesn't mean just to go out and blow your paycheck on a Friday night, not have any food for your family, certainly. And so that's kind of the earthly lesson, boiled down in its most simplest basic terms. And then, of course, the heavenly lesson is above the sun. Everything else he's been talking about is under the sun. What you may have noticed is that after chapter 10, verse 5, if my reading is right, we don't find that phrase under the sun anymore. A lot of times in chapter 9, and really throughout the first 9 chapters, we see that phrase, under the sun, under the sun. Remember what we talked about. God's above the sun, and so he's just talking about a life. And it's hard to phrase, at least hard for me to phrase that in the right way without being misunderstood. He's talking about a life under the sun without the consideration, really without the consideration of heavenly spiritual things. That doesn't mean that you're living your life in an ungodly way, but he's just talking about this is just your earthly existence. We're not talking about how to get to heaven in the under the sun sections. But now, and really it's been sprinkled throughout, but now certainly in chapters 10, well, certainly 11 and 12, he's focusing more on the spiritual lessons of life. And maybe those coincide and coalesce, if you will, in the sense that because this life isn't fair and is broken, that should make us long for something more. And that something more is certainly heaven. Chapter 12 really should start, in my humble opinion, in chapter 11, verse 9. It's kind of where this next thought begins, and it flows all the way through the end of the book. And remember, we said that there's a good sermon outline here. You remember the 3 R's that we see? Can you identify those from chapter 11, verse 9 into chapter 12, verse 1? What are our 3 R's in our sermon outline?
Rejoice, remove, remember.
Okay, rejoice, remove, and remember. Now, this is spoken, as much of the wisdom literature is, and particularly maybe the wisdom literature from the pen of Solomon, is spoken to the young people. You think about your study of Proverbs, of how many times he says, may say, son or young man, do this, avoid that, don't do that. And so this is addressed to the young man, not to say it doesn't apply to young women, but rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Chapter 11, verse 9 says again, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. And so again, kind of reiterating to get the context here, he's saying, and we feel uncomfortable saying this, but Solomon, by inspiration, said it. When you're young, live it up. Do what you want to do in those times. And he's going to talk about wine. We talked about wine. I used the kind of maybe the silly illustration of the idea of parachuting. You want to go over here. I don't know. Where's that parachute place. I don't know exactly where that the name of the town over there is, but you can go over there and lay down your money, and they'll put you in an airplane and kick you out of that airplane in midair. And so do that when you're young. When you have the health to do it, the nerve to do it, because there's going to come a time when you're not suitable for those kind of adventures. And so that's kind of the premise here. Rejoice in the days of your youth. Let your heart cheer you. Walk in the ways of your heart with this huge caveat, this huge asterisk, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. So that when he says walk in the ways of your heart, we would say, in modern day English, we would say, do what you want to do. But that isn't a license to go out and sin. Go do what you want to do. Do what you want to do with the understanding that you're going to be judged for it. So again, jump out of an airplane, get a motorcycle, those kind of things that aren't sinful. He's not saying go have an affair, go rob a bank, those kind of things. But otherwise, with the governor are the limitations that God's going to judge you. As long as it's not sinful, do it when you're young, because that's when those times are made for. Remove, verse 10, therefore remove sorrow from your heart. Again, translations translate that word sorrow, anxiety, vexation. Remove that from your heart. Don't be stressed over things. You're young. It's not the time for anxiety and stress. And put away evil from your flesh, or troubles or pain. I would argue, and we talked about this a little bit, I think, last Wednesday night, that word evil there. When we see the word evil, we think of like a serial killer, or the worst kind of, that's almost the worst word that we reserve for somebody that didn't just make a mistake, but just is just evil in that. But the scriptures will use it that way, but sometimes it's talking about not necessarily moral evil, but just bad things that happen. We had the plane crash yesterday in Louisville, UPS. That was evil, we would say. Not evil in the sense that there was some kind of malicious motive involved or anything in that. It was just bad stuff, is sometimes referred. So he says, remove evil. Some translations say troubles or pain. So I don't think he's necessarily saying remove sinfulness from your heart. I think the implication is that that was never there. But don't, the idea of remove the vexation and anxiety, remove the evil. Don't dwell on bad things, troubles and pain. Nick, and then Mark.
Vexation. But I'm kind of around here where he says, remove away pain from everybody on it. Reminded where Jesus got on to the Pharisees for when they're fasting and trying to look all pitiful and trying to get sympathy and everything. And I think it's the idea of, when you're going through stuff, don't dwell on it. Don't try to have a pity party and all that. Just go on about life. And remember, you'll get through this like everything else.
Yeah. Don't focus on the negative. Look at the positive side of life. Seems to me that what he's saying there. Mark.
Standards is grief and anger.
Grief and anger. Yeah. There's that anger. There's that negative. That this I was wronged here. For childhood and youth are vanity. I take again the word vanity there. A New American Standard uses the word fleeting, I think. That your youth, don't rob yourself of being young. And part of that being young is, again, having these adventures that youth allows for, and not being bore down with stress and anxiety, because you're not always going to be young. So the childhood and youth are fleeting, or vanity are fleeting. And so there's going to come a time when you can't do that, when you can't. And so, uh, you know, Adam and Abby may want to cover Cooper's ears for this part of it, but when you're young, sleep till noon, because when you get old and get a job, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. Childhood and youth are fleeting. And so do those silly things when you're young, because there's going to come a time when you got a mortgage and health insurance to pay and a family to support, that you're not going to be able to do those reckless, again, not sinful, but what we might call as reckless, youthful things. And so rejoice, remove, and now remember. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. And so, just as you have the energy and the desire to go skydiving when you're young, and so he says, go do that, I think he's also saying you should have the energy and the inclination to serve God when you're young in ways that you can't do when you're old. And so this is not a black and white issue. He's not saying, remember God when you're young, and then when you get old, you can slack off and not serve God. But the reality of the situation is that when you're young, there's things you can do in your service to God that you won't be able to do when you're older. You're still serving God when you're older, but you're not serving Him as actively because you're not doing anything else as actively as you used to do. And so remember now your Creator in the days of your youth before the difficult days come. And again, here's back to my point of chapter 11, verse 10 with the word evil. My translation says before the difficult days come. Anybody have a translation reads differently there in verse 1? Evil again. And so he's not saying, again, evil in the sense that, serve God now because 10 years from now, you're going to be, robbing banks and, killing people. Not that kind of evil, but evil in the sense, and if you've reached a certain age, you can understand why he's saying that something about that elderly life is evil. Somebody could say, amen, yes, there's some evil involved. The pains and all the things are evil. Again, not morally evil, not sinful, but just bad day. We would say bad, before the bad days come. And the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. And so you get to that certain age when somebody says, you want to go skydiving? I have no pleasure in that. Or even when, you want to drive an hour to a gospel meeting. I'm just not up to it. I don't have, and so do those things both for yourself, as long as they're not sinful, and for God that you won't be able to do when you get to a certain age. All right, now starting with verse 2 of chapter 12, he gets very poetic. And so a couple things I want to say about this section. The first thing is that this section is going to scare young people and depress old people. And so just get ready. The second thing is that this is poetry. And poetry is difficult, isn't it? It's pretty. It has some benefits to it. But I can remember as a kid in school, maybe y'all can sympathize with this maybe a little bit, when you'd study poetry, and it went over my head. I remember taking in literature classes, even in college, taking lit classes, and you read this poetry, and have some poetry, and it's something about the fog rolling in, and the teachers say, "What does that fog represent?" And I would say, well, moisture droplets in the air. No, the fog represents the Roman army that was, what? Where did you get the Roman army? It was fog. But no, that represents, and so, I don't, my mind doesn't work that way. I'm a kind of a literal kind of guy. And so poetry can be difficult trying to figure out, okay, he said fog, but he didn't really mean fog. What did he mean? And we have to figure it out sometimes. And so you have to help me through this because we're going to have poetry. We're going to have the fog. And now what does the fog represent? And so he's going to say some things, and we have to figure out what they represent. They are representative of older age. We know that, so we've got a hint. These are the difficult days, and this is why, if we were making this in kind of an outline form, we would say the difficult days is the main point, and now subpoint A, here's something that makes it a difficult day. B, this makes it a difficult day. So that's what we're dealing with. Verse 2, while the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are not darkened. And so not darkened means this is the situation when you're young. We could remove the negative in there. When the sun and the light and the moons and stars are darkened is the condition of old age. And so what do we think maybe that means? That in old age, the sun, the light, the moon, and the stars are darkened. I think of two possibilities.
Things you got to deal with when you get at the older age.
Yeah.
House with everything like that.
In more of the generic sense, and that's the way I would take it. More of a generic, the idea that there's just more dark days. There's just, maybe think about just illnesses. That there's just pains and aches and illnesses and different things that darken it. That would be kind of the broad generic view of that. Max?
Right. And so there's more dark days.
Yeah. Could be just the idea that the sun's not as bright as it used to be. And you think that's climate change. No, that's personal change that you're going through there.
My mom is at this point, she sees Ellie reading anywhere that there's not a lamp on. She's like, "Can you read in here? It's too dark. You can't possibly see the words."
Yeah.
Can still see it.
Yeah. Yeah, and Ellie certainly with her young, bright eyes can see those things. So there's the two views. More the broad, generic sense is just in the more literal, specific sense. And the clouds, and stay with me here because he's describing the conditions of old age, but he's doing it in the negative by saying, do this when you're young because you don't have this. And so I'm going to remove the negatives, and I think it's easier to understand. We'll just say, here's the condition of old age. Again, sorry to depress you. But the clouds do return after the rain. Uh, I take that to mean, it's just the idea of, I'll use our farmers in the audience when it's rained and you're trying to get into the field and it rains and that rain's over and you go, finally, good, it's rain. And then, oh, there comes another cloud in the west. It's coming back another cloud. And you're just like, I can't. And I take that to mean it's just one thing after another. You've got this arthritis and you take that and you found a medicine that helped with your arthritis and then finally, and now your heart starts acting up and you got to go to the doctor for the, remember my dad made the comment that after he had retired, he said, I figured out why I had to retire and I had to free up time for all my doctor's appointments. Because, and that's another joke I've heard is there's two signs when you're old. You want to hear those two signs? Sign number one is what happens when you fall. Trip and fall and people laugh. That's a good sign because you're still young. But if you trip and fall and they don't laugh, that you're old because now people are worried. It's not funny anymore. Uh, and my dad said another sign that you're old is you got more than one doctor. For most of your life, you just got a doctor. But now you got a doctor for this, got a doctor for my ears and for my eyes and for my heart and for my back and all that. And so it's just the cloud comes in after rain. It's just one thing after another. It's not just that you've got one ailment or one problem. It's just they just multiply. You get over one thing and here comes another storm that's coming.
Yeah, clouds and rain are going to come, but after the rain's over, you expect them to go away and the sun to come. And so even though it may rain and the clouds coming in, that if they don't rain, it's still gloomy.
Yeah.
You don't get that really.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's just gloomy over and over. There's always that again, when you're young and you have to go to the doctor, he gives you a pill or a little surgery and you get over that and you're back to work and doing it. When you're older, it doesn't work that way, does it? It's just that gloom's always there, or it's always one thing after another. Yeah, a lot of follow-up visits. Verse 3, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble. What do we think maybe that's a poetic reference to? I think there's some literalness in that, just the idea of trembling. Your hands, maybe the idea here is just your hands, the keepers of the house are the hands, and they begin to tremble. You don't have that steady hand anymore. You're dropping things now. Yeah, and you got the shakes, my growing up, I don't think this is the correct technical term, but we always called it she's got the palsy, we would say. And again, I don't think that's the right technical medical term, but there's the idea that somebody's hands are trembling and shaking. I think the next phrase is, go ahead, Mark.
That mighty men stoop, they start breaking down.
Yeah, that's that next one. The strong men bow down. And again, we've all seen this, maybe in your grandfather or something, this guy who was just strong as an ox and, 6'2" or something, and now he's and stooped over and just, there's again, I think that was maybe one of the easiest to interpret. The strong men, yeah, yeah, now bow down, they're bent over. When the grinders cease because they are few, what do we think the grinders might be? Teeth, yeah, your teeth. Uh, the grinders cease because they're few. You don't have it. And certainly think in ancient times, now, we've got helps to that, don't we? We've got better dental care than they had in Solomon's day. And so maybe we can preserve those teeth. But even now, you lose your teeth, you go buy a new set, get your false teeth in. But in ancient times, you think about their dental care. You pull a tooth, you didn't get a replacement to go in it. You just lost that tooth, and then so you live to be a certain age. Pop, 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 pop. You end up with fewer teeth, and this maybe either reiterates or gets more specific than the sun and light getting darkened. It says, "And those that look through the windows grow dim." Well, what looks through the windows? Eyes, and again, they grow dim. And again, think in ancient times, if your eyesight now, if your eyesight gets weak, you go and you get glasses and cataracts. I think of the idea of dimming. You go get those cataracts shaved off. Well, Solomon's day, if you had a cataract, you just had a cataract. And if your eyes went bad, as far as I know, they didn't have eyeglasses back in Solomon's day, any kind of magnification help, and so the eyes just grow dim. The doors are shut in the streets, and the sound of grinding is low. There's differences of opinion, as there often is in poetic language. The doors are shut in the streets could mean the idea, if we go outside of the body, we've been kind of doing, hands, the back, the teeth, the eyes. If we go outside of the body, it's the idea of, you're afraid to go out at night. You're afraid to go out into the street, so you just lock your door and you don't answer the door because you're more fearful. The other, if we stayed in the body, which maybe is the best thing to do because he's been talking about different body parts being affected, that maybe the idea here is the lips. The doors are shut in the street, and the sound of grinding is low. Can you relate to this next one? Mid part of verse 4, when one rises up at the sound of a bird. What do we think that means?
Not a crow, but a rooster.
Maybe a rooster, but the maybe even just a little bird, just a little quiet, cheep, cheep, and just the difficulty. It's harder to sleep when you get. I can remember. At least I don't like to put myself in this category yet, but I can remember when I was a kid, I could sleep, anywhere. I could sleep standing up in the corner somewhere in the train station. But now, I got to have a pillow over my head and eye mask on and sound machine going and the lights off and this, and even then, just something wakes you up and stirs you up. So the inability to sleep. And the daughters of music are brought low. Again, we could go two ways of that. Is this music you're listening to, and so your hearing is down, or is this music you're singing, and now your voice is weak? Your voice isn't as strong as it used to be. Um, they're afraid of height. And that certainly is the case, the idea, and of terrors in the way. I don't take the terrors here to be like a burglar or even a rabid dog, but just the idea of just the inability to walk or an unstable walk. You just need flat terrain. You're afraid of the terrors and afraid to go up there. Oh, there were stairs going. What's new to me, I don't call it the courthouse, where you pay your taxes here in Joplin in Jasper County. When we were getting everything set up with our cars and all that, I had to go there and pay personal property taxes on the cars in order to get the tag. And I walked up there, and there was a lady with a walker coming up there, and if there was a ramp, I didn't see it. I don't know why they built that new building, and it doesn't seem to be handicap accessible. It doesn't make sense to me. If there was, like I said, if there's a ramp, it's on the side or the back somewhere. And so I had to help that poor lady up these stairs. She was with a walker, and there's stairs going into the courthouse. And so, you know, 20 years, 30 years ago, she wouldn't have thought anything about that. But now they're afraid of the height, and their terrors in the way, the steps and those different things. When the almond tree blossoms, now what does an almond tree look like when it blossoms? White. Okay, so what do we think that was referring to? Maybe the hair. The hair gets white. If you're lucky, it gets white. In my case, it just falls out. Yeah, if you got hair. Yeah, that's my problem. And so the almond tree blossoms. The grasshopper is a burden. Two ways of taking that kind of mean the same thing. It could mean that the idea that even carrying a grasshopper is a burden. Something as small as that, used to you could carry a 50-pound bag of, feed on on each shoulder and walk in. Now it's difficult to just carry a grasshopper. So that's one possible interpretation. The other is, what's the most prominent feature of a grasshopper that when you think about it? It's his legs, isn't it? The grasshoppers are all legs. And so maybe the idea here is that your feet and legs are a burden. They're not as active and helpful. Nick and then Max.
Says the grasshopper drags itself along.
Yeah. And so there's the idea of taking that view that this is talking about not the ability to carry a grasshopper, but you're the grasshopper. And you,
Fish bait.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're just fish bait now, that your legs don't work as good. Max?
That translation too. You know, a month ago, why the big fat grasshoppers, why they jumped and they were feeling good. You couldn't catch one to feed to the chickens if you wanted to, But after the first frost, why they've got a dark color to them and they're just kind of barely moving along. They've about had it and they know it.
Yeah, yeah. And so to follow that theme, you get to a certain age, you're in the winter of your life. And so you're like that to where you can't. And like I said, you're just a fish bait or chicken bait now because you can't move. The next one, and this is the last one, and desire fails. Two different views of that one that don't differ greatly. And again, one is just the generic sense, your desire, and that is just your desire to do something. They just don't have the gumption anymore, the want to. Used to, you're always up for an adventure. You go on a trip and do this and do that, and now you're just like, I don't feel like it anymore. And so that's the more broad term of the idea of desire. The more narrow, specific sense would be that maybe he's talking about a sexual desire fails. Kind of very similar, just the idea of just the desire to do something is just, I just don't have the energy for it anymore. Thanks.
Right. This version says the caperberry is ineffective. Yeah. And I was going to ask you, I've never heard it.
Of the caperberry. Yes, yeah, and so it just doesn't work anymore. Uh, well, I'll leave it alone. I was going to reference a certain colored peel that doesn't work anymore, but I wasn't going to say that. So here is again depressing if you're that age, scary if you're younger. But we get his point that all of this is just a depressing poetic way of saying these are the difficult days when you're going to say, I have no pleasure in them. And so why is he saying rejoice, remove, and remember when you're young? Because you'll be a time when there's not as much rejoicing. I don't have the energy for that. I don't want to do that. Two veins of that. Rejoicing, you don't have the energy to go on those adventures that you can when you're young, and you don't have this energy to serve the Lord as vigorously. Again, that's not giving a pass to older people that they can't serve the Lord anymore, but let's just be honest. You can't serve Him in the ways that you used to could. Uh, yeah, the ability, the energy, the ability, it just, those things suffer. And so before you get to that, enjoy it. And we talk about Solomon here. How many older people have given that advice to younger people? You better enjoy it while you're young. You better do that. When you say those kind of things, that's what Solomon is saying. You better do it while you can, uh, but because it's time's going to run out when you can't do that. It gets worse. If you think that was depressing, it gets worse because he says, "For a man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about in the street." I think we can all understand that poetry. We can interpret what's happening there. It gets more poetic, though. Verse 6, remember your Creator. So he's reiterating what the point of this is. And I love that because sometimes when you go on a long soliloquy like this, a long speech like this, and you kind of think, okay, what was he talking about? What was his point? And so he repeats his point and says, remember. This is all about remembering your Creator when you have the youth, the vitality, the energy of young age. So remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. 4 poetic expressions that mean the same thing. And what are those 4 expressions referencing? Death. When that pitcher shatters, it's gone, isn't it? You can't. It's not a chip in it, and you can still use it. It's shattered at the well, and so it's gone. It can't be used anymore. And so the other one is just talking about the frailty and the ailments of old age, and now the end result of that is just death. And so do these things while you can, before you get older and you can't do them, and before you die and you really can't do them. Then, verse 7, the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. And so he seems to be a subtle shift. That's hard for me to say, subtle shift here. He's saying, young people, do these things, enjoyable things for yourself, kingdom things for the Lord, while you have the youth and the energy and the desire to do them, because it just gets worse. You're going to decline in health and energy, and then finally you're going to die, and you're not going to be able to do those things. So that's kind of the main point. But to me, the subtle shift is now he's not just saying you're going to get old and die, but what did the Hebrew writer say? After death comes the judgment. And so you need to be doing these things in service to God, remembering your Creator, because you're going to meet your Creator. You're going to meet your Maker one day. Your spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity. And so you're going to die. The energy's going to wane. It's going to go away. And then it's just going to stop. And isn't that just vanity? Isn't that just kind of just the end of it? All right. Any comments or questions on that section before we move into the conclusion? Yes, Nick.
Let's back up to the verse 10 where it says, remove vexation from your heart, and do the things before you get older. Such a shame when younger people are either too kind of anxious about going out into the world and making their way and doing things, or even family or friends or whatever kind of discourage them
Yeah.
from going out and making their way in the world and having those adventures in a good way, not a sinful way, which so many times they're discouraged from it because they're like, oh, they may sin.
Mm.
That's part of growing and maturing. And if they don't do that, or if they're held back from that, when they do get old, they've already missed it.
Yeah.
And they can't go do those adventures. And then that's when they're grumpy old men and resentful because they didn't do those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Something themselves or some other. And that's a good point. Sometimes we see young people who, act like grumpy old men. A young man acts like a grumpy, and just like, Relax. You're young. You're to be, and then sometimes older people, parents, maybe unwittingly discourage what the wise man is saying here and saying, "Oh, you got it, man. Wait till you get old. You have to pay bills, and you got these responsibilities." Don't chide a child for being a child. He's what he's supposed to be. They're supposed to be, careless and not have to worry about those things. They're going to have, you know, 50, 60 years of those burdens. And don't chide them for not having them when they're 10, 11, and 12. That's when they're supposed to be silly and childish and not have those responsibilities. And so don't mock them and chide them for not having them. They're not supposed to. That's what your job is. And so let's be careful in that. Yeah. Yeah. Guide them gently, keep them out of the trouble, but still encourage them to be young and to enjoy their youth. And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable. Let me pause here. Either the preacher's patting himself on the back, or some argue that this is kind of an epilogue written by someone else. That's kind of just the summary. Here's what the preacher, it's not the preacher speaking of himself in third person. It's actually a third person that's talking about. Here's what the preacher did. Here's kind of wrapping it up. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright, words of truth. And so, taking his broad work, not just the book of Ecclesiastes, but probably the Song of Solomon, certainly the Proverbs, here's what the wise man tried to do, to write words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads. Anybody have a translation that's different there? It's a word that we don't use often, but we probably know. What's a goad? Yeah, the cattle prod. It's basically a sharp stick. In that day, we have different maybe electronic devices. One of the worst weapons I got in my life was associated with a cattle prod. Uh, and thankfully, my merciful Granny Hazel saved me. Or instead of a whipping, my grandpa was going to shock me with a cattle prod because I failed to use it properly. I let the cows get out because I was shocking bugs with the cattle prod, and I was supposed to be keeping the cows uh, in. And so my grandpa said, "I'll show you how this thing works." And to this day, I believe he was going to show me how it worked if I hadn't have got to my Granny Hazel before he got to me. And so, yeah, it's just this. They're like gold, something that's prodding you on into a certain direction. So the words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. And so we think, you take this in two ways: nails that nail something down and hold it in, but the thought is maybe that ancients used nails as goads. That sometimes if you had again, if you've done any farming or ranching, you can maybe relate to this, have like what we call a cattle chute, where you want the cows or the goats to go into this chute, and you're trying to funnel them into this chute so they can go into this particular way, that they would drive these nails into the boards at an angle. Think about, you've been in a big city where you're not supposed to drive into this parking lot, and they got those spikes, and you can go one way, but if you back up, you're going to puncture, and those nails would be driven into the boards of that chute. So the cow was going in, he's brushing them this way, and he's just getting, it feels good, a little bit of scratch on there. But if he tries to back up, he's getting the sharp end of the. So there's maybe the idea of the nails, another term for gold in that. That are well driven, given by one shepherd. So that's the argument that this is talking about those things, because these are shepherding terms. And so the words.
Cruising to animals.
Yeah, yeah. But it has its purpose there. And so these words of the wise or of the scholar are intended to push you in a certain direction. They're not just good sayings. Oh, that was smart. They have a purpose to them, and that purpose is, again, to direct. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. You can relate to that if you remember your school days. All right, most famous part of the book is here. Let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. So this is not just, I don't think, the conclusion of the matter of chapter 12, remember, rejoice, remove. I think he's saying of the whole book. What's the whole point of this? Fear God and keep his commandments. That's what its life is all about. Again, the New King James says this is the whole duty of man. Anybody have a translation that says that differently?
The conclusion when all has been heard is fear God.
All right, and it's for this is the whole duty of man. Is that what it says there? The literal word here is this is the whole of man. Duty kind of conveys it, but I think it goes deeper than that. He's saying that this is the whole of man. This is everything you are. This is your whole being is to do. Not just this is your duty, which that again kind of conveys the thought, but this is who you are. Is to fear God and keep his commandment. This is the whole of man. This is the integrity, the wholeness of who you are. For, oh, yeah. Man's all, yeah. That's the idea of this is the whole. This is man's all. This is who you are. Yeah. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. I wonder if that last one is kind of the last asterisk, because he said throughout here, eat, drink, and be merry. Enjoy life. And to the young people, do what your heart desires. But he kind of like wants to conclude by, but remember, you're going to be judged. And so don't misinterpret what I was saying about eat, drink, and be merry. I wasn't go out here and get drunk and party. That wasn't saying that. Young people, do what you want to do. That didn't mean what you might think it means. The fear God and keep his commandment because God's going to judge you.
The proper attitude toward life and God.
Yeah, absolutely. The proper attitude with God in mind. All right. Well, that brings us to a conclusion of this, I think, very wonderful, very practical book. All right. Have y'all decided what we're studying next?
Hebrews.
Hebrews? Okay. Well, let's save Hebrews for Sunday because I don't know how long y'all been doing this Old Testament Wednesday night, New Testament on that. Okay. Yeah, that would be a good one. That would be a good one. How about we go back to the beginning, in the beginning, and just study the book of Genesis? Is that all right? Because I don't know. Have you done that recently? I don't know. Okay. So we'll start Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 next Wednesday night. Thanks, guys.